Hello and welcome to another episode of Conservation Conversations. We're on season 3, episode 20 already. I'm your host, Christina Hagen, coming to you live from Cape Town, South Africa. So, on to the main event. Dr. Rob Simmons is an ecologist, conservation biologist, and environmental consultant with research experience in North America, Europe, Asia, and Africa. Rob's academic career has taken him from England, where he did his honours in astronomy and physics before turning to biology with an MSc in Canada and a PhD in evolution at Wits University. He studies threatened raptors with a long-term emphasis on Black Harrier ecology, the biodiversity impact of domestic cats, and evolution of giraffe with his students. He is on the advisory board of the Wind Energy Specialist Group for BirdLife South Africa, and is the BirdLife South Africa Black Harrier Species Guardian, and completed guidelines for Black Harriers and wind farms in 2020. Dr. Odette Curtis-Scott holds a PhD in botany from the University of Cape Town, an MSc in zoology, and a BTech in nature conservation, and has collaborated on 15 scientific publications to date. She spent several years working on raptors before starting the Overberg Renosterveld Conservation Trust in 2012. Odette has discovered several new plant species, or new to science, in the Renosterveld, 2 of which have been named after her. And she is absolutely passionate about Renosterveld conservation and has essentially already spent more than a third of her working life towards improving our ecological understanding of this severely threatened ecosystem, while at the same time ensuring that the Renosterveld has a future. Now, because of load shedding, Rob and Odette pre-recorded their talks, and I will play them shortly, but I just wanted to invite, they are online with us. I wanted to invite Rob and Odette if you want to say anything before I play the talks. I know that you will probably pop off the Zoom call while I'm playing the talks just to preserve your batteries, which is fine, but if you want to say anything before I start playing them, please go ahead now.
Hi, Christina. Hi, everyone, from Rob. I'm in a very dark comic key. It's been very warm and balmy today, and I'm very excited to share the Black Harrier work that we've done over the last 20 years with all of you.
Thanks, Rob, and the same from myself, except I'm in a cold, dark, not yet dark Napier, but we are soon to go into darkness too. So let's hope we can get through this together. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
No, thank you both for the time and effort you've put into conserving these birds and into sharing the information with us. So I will now start playing the recorded talks. Rob and Odette will join us to answer some questions at the end of the webinar.
I would like to start by thanking BirdLife South Africa for this opportunity to kick off their second 100 and so beautifully finished off by Anton Wolfart last week, talking about Marion and its mice. We're going to change tack a little bit to look at Black Harriers this week. And since I won't have a chance at the end of the talk to acknowledge all of those hundreds and hundreds of Harrier citizen scientists who have helped me over the years, I would like to briefly mention some of the bird clubs who have helped financially and in the field, and especially Brian van der Walt. He has been amazing getting us tags and finances through the Tygerberg Bird Club. And to those in Natal who have supported our work as well. I'm very grateful indeed. Also to Sam Ralston Peyton of BirdLife. She is the renewable energy manager, and I'd like to thank her for her role in all of the wind farm work that we've done over the years and in producing, helping produce the guidelines that I'll speak to a little bit later. So today's talk is divided into 3 bite-sized bits, and that includes, I will kick off looking at some of the history, some of the genetics, some of the ecological background, and so on. And then Dr. Odette Curtis, who you will probably know since she's such a dynamic lady. She will be talking about Renosterveld and the conservation work that she's doing in the Overberg. and she's worked with me on Black Harriers for 20 years now. It shows our age a little bit. I'm co-authoring this talk with Marley, my partner in Birds and Bats, and Francisco Staravantes, otherwise known as Pachi, who's done some amazing statistical work. So thanks to all of those people. We're going to, the second half will be done by Odette, talking about her work, as I say, and then she will end with a short film of her work and how you can help into the future. So, as I say, my work began with Odette 2 decades ago, more than 2 decades ago. She was supervised in her master's study by Dr. Andrew Jenkins and myself, and 22 years later we are still churning out some honours and PhDs, and we certainly know a lot more about this species. And it's not always good news, I have to say. We now know it's a lot rarer than we originally thought. Our main aims at the start of the project were to try and understand the role of habitat fragmentation, and to see if that affects the bird's reproductive success, to determine if certain habitats promoted higher breeding success. In other words, were they better in fynbos, were they more productive at the coast, were they more productive in the mountains, and so on. And then lastly, to determine how the harriers use their landscape around their nests. We set about answering those by spending a lot of time locating nests. Now, Odette has done so, Sophie Garcia Harris has done so, and we have so far got a fairly large sample of nests. Let's have a look so I can see this better. We have located 180 nest sites altogether over the last 2 decades. Now 60% of those are in protected areas. So this is a species that relies on protected areas within either private nature reserves or especially some of our national parks like the West Coast National Park. In those 17 years actually, up until about 2017, we had accumulated 490 nest records of this very rare species to give us some insight into their breeding success and their habitat use. Now, to get a better handle on the habitat use, we tracked 13 birds with Argos satellite trackers, and then as technology caught up with us, we were able to track 6 birds, and we hope to track more with GPS trackers, and that tells us their height as well, which is a very useful thing when we're talking about wind farms, which is going to be part of the focus of this talk. And Sophie, who I mentioned, you'll see her just now, she looked at, in her PhD, the health status of the species, looking at DDT and PCBs in live nestlings and live adults. And I'm going to end with a look at the possibility of extinction of this species, modelled by Pachi over the last 17 or 18 years. Just to give you a flavour, 20 decades in 20 minutes is quite a tall order, so I'm going to give you a brief overview of what we have achieved. We know that fynbos and Renosterveld is the preferred habitat. We know that from Odette's work that the harriers require about 100 hectares of pristine habitat, and the minimum patch size is 100 hectares, and that means they are breeding there and they are foraging within that. If it's smaller than that or fragmented and it makes up 100, it's not suitable for black harriers. They will tend to, they might forage over it, but they won't breed in it. And they do tend to be semi-colonial breeders, so you might have 5 or 10 birds pairs, as we found in the Overberg just recently in Odette's patch, that we have found, I think, at least 10, 12 birds breeding in a very small patch in Chorizo in the Overberg. Now, we have found that coastal areas, both Odette and Sophie, found that coastal areas are more productive than mountains, and one of the reasons for that is that there are many more mice coming in to the coastal areas than in the montane areas. The breeding season tends to start earlier and tends to end later. So the breeding season length is longer, generally goes from about June through to December. And the number of fledglings is also closely related with the rainfall. So here's a quick graph to show you the average number of fledglings fledged on the vertical axis there. Goes from about 1 to 3, and then the mean daily rainfall, that should read a millimetre. It goes up sharply and significantly as we rise from 2.5 to 3.5 millimetres per day through the breeding season. So two studies have actually found that the breeding success is related to rainfall and negatively to temperature. As temperatures increase, the birds tend to hide away in the shade and not forage anywhere. We've also discovered new migration routes to Lesotho with both sets of tags. And just briefly, we found very low genetic variation. I've worked with some very clever geneticists, Jerome Fuchs being one of them, and Graham Oatley, both of whom were at the Fitzpatrick Institute, and by collecting molted feathers over many years from about 50 nests, we could show that the mitochondrial, the mtDNA there, is basically, there's only one haplotype, as the geneticists say. That means there's only one copy of the mitochondrial DNA. That doesn't mean they are photocopies of each other, because that's not the nuclear DNA. But they are very similar to each other, unfortunately, which allows not much latitude for genetic variation in the future in response to, let's say, climate change. Now, I've put evolved from ... there just to ask you a question to keep you awake. Do you know what species the Black Harrier has evolved from? You can put that in the chat box. Health-wise, Sophie found some very troubling things. For example, 84% of the birds that she looked at were carrying some burden of DDT and its derivatives, DDE and so on, and 78% were carrying PCB burdens. And I've got ESCOM there. I'm recording this just in case, and just in case ESCOM do throw a wobbly, just as I'm about to tell you all about Black Harriers. So this is a recording. ESCOM come in there because PCB oils are found in the transformer boxes, and Sophie found a very interesting correlation between the density of transformer boxes with the PCB oils in them and the amount of PCBs in the Harrier nestlings within 5 kilometers of those transformer boxes. That's a very controversial result that ESCOM didn't like, but I don't have the time to go into that. The most important thing about that is their immune system of the Harriers is compromised by both DDT and PCBs. So we are seeing birds flying around with compromised immune systems. So let's quickly go to the Black Harrier origins and answer that question. Which species has the Black Harrier evolved from? As I say, I work with some very clever geneticists, Graham Oatley and Jerome Fuchs, and they found this phylogeny. I don't want you to take in the details of it. I just want to show you that the top part of the phylogeny tree there is composed of marsh harriers. And if you can see my cursor down at the bottom there, we've got Aeruginosus, which is the European marsh harrier, Circus renovorus, which is the African marsh harrier. These are all the marsh harriers, and they all group out together. Below that, see if I can move me. No, I can't. Below that are the steppe harriers, so-called steppe harriers. These are the dry country harriers, and there's our bird. And the one that it's most closely related to genetically is the pallid harrier. Now, from the genetic clock, molecular clock, we can determine that the birds were evolved approximately 1.5 to 1.7 million years ago from this beautiful pallid harrier. They are very similar to them behaviorally, in that the pallid harrier is known to be very nomadic. It looks it migrates first of all, and on its way back it looks for ideal areas to nest, and is looking for good mouse populations. And the black harrier does exactly the same thing. So behaviorally they are very similar species, even though they don't go very similar. But then if you've got 1.5 to 1.7 million years to evolve, then you don't have to look the same after all of that time. Another thing that is very interesting from a behavioral point of view is this, and that is Sophie is stealing an egg from an incubating female. There she is, looking shocked. I think the female black harrier is looking equally shocked, and then she shows that she's laid actually four eggs there. This doesn't happen very often, but I've put it in here to show that these birds are very, very easily overlooked. You can walk up to some of these birds, about 1% of birds in the 500 nests, 500 nest visits that we've done over the years. And there's Sophie stealing an egg quickly to go and do some assessments of it. It's PCBs and DDTs and so on. So as I say, we tagged a lot of birds over the years, and I think we've gone through the whole gamut of ways of tracking birds. And down here in the right hand corner we've got the old VHF transmitters that you had to sew the antenna to the tail. In the top left around, and that was in 2002 when Odette and I were young and still sprightly. And then in the top left hand corner we have the Argus satellite tags, which are 12.5 grams, which then sit on the back of the bird with a little harness that goes around the bird, doesn't harm it, with an antenna. And then down in the bottom left, and there's Odette looking very relieved, we've got very much smaller tags of just 9 grams, which tell us they are much more accurate and tell us height data as well. So, migration routes. What have the trackers revealed to us? There's Sophie releasing a bird, and of course when we release the bird we have no idea what's going to happen to it, whether it's going to survive, they always do, and then where they go. And this is what she found from her sampling of birds from 2013 to 2016. So you see the stars in the left hand side are where the birds were caught at their nests. They're almost always breeding in the western and northern Capes, and then the green tracks, the orange tracks, the red tracks and the blue tracks show the birds disappearing off to the east of the country, and they do that in the summer months, because of course the summer months are when the rains are happening in the east, and they fly to Lesotho. And the importance of Lesotho is it's cool, it's high, and actually in March and April the rains are at their maximum there, and that's when actually the ice rats, which we think they are feeding on, are breeding. So they are setting up territories in Lesotho, above Sani Pass. And to give you some greater insight into that, I'm just going to take you through a bird, Maria, who we tracked from Langebaan, where she had been breeding, and we caught her in November 2010. And you'll see the light purple track. Just concentrate on Langebaan and the light purple track going from the west to the east, and she headed towards Lesotho from the West Coast National Park in February 2011, and she absolutely shot across the Karoo. She did 1,000 kilometers in 4 days and went to the southern Drakensberg, and then she went up into the Sani Pass area to a place called Mokot Long, and there she stayed. And she over-summered between February and April 2011. We knew exactly her track, her territory and the size of her territory. But then concentrate on the blue track as she starts to meander back. Early July she starts to head back, and she goes through Nkobo in the Eastern Cape. Continue to follow the blue track. She goes through Somerset West. And then she decides enough of this sampling, and she goes shooting across the Karoo into the Overberg and straight back to Langebaan. But the most surprising thing was she didn't stay there. She actually spent an afternoon, the 20th of July, in Langebaan. She flew immediately in northeast into the mountains, and then she headed for Beaufort West. So she did 260 kilometers on the 21st of July. Still followed the blue track. And then she spent a little bit of time in the Aberdeen area, but then she did an interesting thing. She went back to Somerset East and she went back to Mkobo, just to sample a mere another 540 kilometers. She then turned around again, go on the green track this time, back through Somerset East, to sample again, and then she headed back to Aberdeen, where she's already been once before, and then we lost her signal, and we thought, oh dear goodness, 4,000 or 5,000 kilometers later, she has finally run out of steam. That was not true. She had actually travelled over 5,800 kilometres in 6 months, and we found her breeding successfully in the Kamdabou Mountains. Now, the interesting thing about that is this nest site was over 500 kilometers away from her previous year's nest site. Now, for those of you who know anything about raptors, you will know that generally they'll go and choose the same nest sites. The Varro's eagles, jackal buzzards and so on are pretty much on their same nest site. Not with the Black Harrier. They're going to find the best breeding area and go and choose it. So we have very low site fidelity as far as breeding birds go. What did she then do? Once she'd finished breeding successfully up in the Kamdabou Mountains there in a beautiful little marsh, she then migrated all the way back to Lesotho, almost exactly to that same summering area where she was before. So she showed us a great deal about this species. By putting trackers on birds, we not only find the interesting things, we also uncover the darker side of Black Harriers, and that is the fatalities that occur. So unless you're following a bird, you won't find that a bird is killed under a power line or under a wind turbine. So up until 2021, we didn't know that fatality occurred on any other areas except for migration. Once we put the tags on birds, we found 3 of those had been killed under power lines. The first bird photographed here was Lockie. She was tracked 1,600 kilometers from Nieuwertville to the Free State grasslands. She went through Lesotho to get there, and then she died under this small reticulation line. We think she hit the line because actually her track suggested that she was still alive for 2 or 3 days before these guys found her, and she'd gone down to a stream to drink. Motlanthe, a male from West Coast National Park, he was found under transmission lines near the Berg River in 2013. And then a female from Jakkelsfontein called Yucky. Her red track is shown here. She was up in the mountains in the Piketberg area in January 2016, and suddenly her track stopped, and you can see those little yellow dots there, where we eventually found her underneath a big transmission line, the white line, which crosses the image there. My daughter Julia and I found her. Just to see if it really could have been due to the power line, so we took her to a vet who kindly x-rayed her for us, and the vet found this spinal trauma. You'll see the backbone has actually been hit and dented there as if she's flown up into a power line, so that was fairly good evidence. So 3 of our 19 birds, 16%, are suspected to have been killed by power lines. So what are the other forms of mortality? Well, the obvious one is the new and very much in the news wind farms. Do Harriers avoid wind farms? Black Harriers? I say Harriers because in Europe Harriers tend to avoid wind farms, and apparently very few are killed. We've found that's not quite true, but they do avoid wind farms, and they tend to move away from them. Here's the track of one of our Black Harriers from Chorizo in the bottom right hand corner here, and the green track is his track through the Excelsior wind farm. The Excelsior wind farm is the red polygon here, and the turbines there are shown. The 13 turbines are shown by the little blue triangles there, and it's quite clear that on a regular basis this bird, male 48 with a GPS tracker, was going through the Excelsior wind farm. I've put another male 47 in yellow here, and he went more often through the Excelsior wind farm. So this is 2 months worth, from November 10th of November to the 26th of January, 2 months worth of flights of these two birds, both of whom were going through the Excelsior wind farm. I will leave Odette to tell you a little bit about what the outcome of this travelling through the wind farms was. Do wind farms play a role in mortality? Yes, unfortunately they do for Black Harriers. Marley and I did an intensive study, a 4-year study at Jeffreys Bay Wind Farm, and we revealed 6 known deaths of Black Harriers there. So here are the real characters involved in this unfortunate for fatalities. A male in October 2016 at turbine 37. A breeding male. We know he was a breeding male because we were watching him and his nest on the wind farm, and suddenly the food supply to the nest stopped, and as a result of that the youngster died, and the carcass searchers actually told us they had seen this bird fly into T55, and they'd found him still alive. That bird is still alive in the picture there. We found, just after our study had finished, a breeding female. She had a brood patch. She was found under turbine 3 at Jeffreys Bay Wind Farm in November 2019, and then an adult male before we'd started our studies in 2014 we realised was also a black harrier. It had been misidentified as a buzzard. And one thing you'll notice about this is we've got October, November and October there. We were wondering why on earth there would be such a concentration, and since we've added to that sample size, and Marley and I noticed that birds commuting back to their nests, the males commuting back to their nests with prey, were actually not flying as black harriers normally do at ground level. They were soaring up and then catching thermals and then planing down. And if there's a wind farm in the way, planing down to their nest. If there's a wind farm in the way, then they're going to plane through there at blade swept height or rotor swept heights. And this is exactly the time, October and November, when the males do this, and we've got data to show that the proportion of flights goes up to 45% within the blade swept height. And before that and after that, it's around 0%. They're not flying within the blade swept height. So it's the behavior of the males which is killing these birds. And altogether, at Jeffreys Bay, there's an average of 1.5 adult birds killed over the 4-year period. In other words, 6 birds in 4 years, and there are 8 known black harriers killed since 2014 in South African wind farms. Remember that figure of 1.5. So what is the effect of the increased fatality on population trends? Fortunately, we've got some very clever statisticians in the form of Francisco Cervantes, so we know him as Pachi, and he revealed some very alarming population trends. And to all of you who have filled in a SABAP field card or a bird lasser these days and put a black harrier on it, thank you. You are responsible for the analysis that we could go through and Pachi could undertake with detection and non-detection using SABAP2 data over the last 16 or 17 years. So thank you to you guys who have who have filled in data cards, because from that we now know that the Black Harrier population that we've guesstimated for decades now is about 1,300 individuals in the world, plus or minus 80 individuals. That's a very, very low number. There's only 2 species of lark which have lower, of endemic species of lark in South Africa have lower numbers than that. The other thing that Patchy's clever modelling threw up, and it comes with almost all modelling of long-lived species, is that by killing adult birds, you have a greater impact on the population numbers than by reducing breeding success or by killing youngsters. So killing adult birds is a real no-no, and unfortunately wind farms, the only birds we've known that are killed by wind farms are adult birds, and most of them are breeding birds, as well, as Marley and I found out. So that is very bad news as far as wind farms go. And the annual decline, remember Patchy did use SABAP data that went before wind farms had come along into South Africa, which was about 2014. This data is about, I said 17 years, it's 11 years, 12 years of data, but it started in 2008, before wind farms were on the landscape. The annual decline during the time when wind farms were coming in was 2.3%. That alone, that decline is very high per year, and that alone would lead to population extinction in about 200 years. So let's have a look at what this would mean if you killed 1 adult per year, 1 extra adult beyond the background population. Well, the extinction time to extinction would decline to by about 50 years, and the bird would go extinct in about 150 years. And then it gets really troubling if you were to take 3 extra adults out of the population killed per year, and there's a 61% chance that the Black Harrier global population would go extinct in 100 years. If that were to rise to 5 adults killed per year by wind farms or by other anthropogenic factors, then there's a 75% chance that the Black Harrier population would go extinct in 75 years. And this is why placement of wind farms is so important in South Africa. There's no maneuver, there's no room for maneuver to kill any of our remaining Black Harriers. What are we going to do about that? Well, already BirdLife South Africa have published guidelines for specialists to, first of all, find these birds, how to best find them, how to best monitor them, and we have provided in there a set of nest finding guidelines, survey techniques, when to look, how to look, how many hours, and then if you do find them, the mitigations for your wind farm. Things like nest buffers. Nest buffers are very large for a species of this size, 3 to 5 kilometers. In order to avoid the fatalities that we've seen. Unfortunately, the Excelsior wind farm was 3.5 kilometers away from the big breeding area in Choriso in the Overberg, and Odette will mention that just now. I should say that despite this concentration on wind farms, they are not to blame for the continuing decline of the Black Harrier. They are the cherry on the top. They're the visible one. You see a Black Harrier dead underneath a turbine, but you don't see a Black Harrier dead because of habitat loss. And we believe the habitat loss is probably the biggest driver of this decline. Now I'm going to hand over to Odette now. And she's going to tell you about her amazing work with the Overberg Renosterveld Conservation Trust, and how she's combating this habitat loss. And of course she knows all about Black Harriers as well, so that's been her flagship species. So over to Odette.
Thanks.
Hi Melissa.
Thank you very much for that, Rob. I will now start playing Odette's.
Hi everyone, and thanks to Rob and BirdLife for giving me the opportunity to interject at this point. and to share with you some of the work that we are doing as the Overberg Renosterveld Conservation Trust towards conserving Black Harriers and their habitats. So I'd just like to start by setting the scene first and explaining the context here of Renosterveld in the Overberg. Historically, this vegetation type would have covered what is now the wheat belt, which abuts the fynbos, mountainous fynbos habitats in the northern and southern parts of its range, or extents of its range. Renosterveld is found on much more fertile substrates than its sister fynbos, and because of this, most of it has been ploughed up for agriculture to the extent that less than 5% remains today. This is the estimate, and it's still declining, still being degraded and put under the plough. So the darker remnants that you see overlaid on these over these different Renosterveld vegetation types in the Overberg, those represent all that is left. And you can see from this there are some very large, well, relatively large areas, and by large in Renosterveld I mean about 500 hectares max when they're all connected, mostly connected by small watercourses and streams which kind of hold them all together. Despite the sad and fragmented and dire situation that Renosterveld has found itself in, it contains an extraordinary amount of diversity. Its plant diversity rivals that of fynbos, equals or even rivals, certainly rivals in many areas that of fynbos. So despite its homogeneous and dull appearance at first, it is actually an incredibly rich system, and this is why we are working so hard towards conserving these remnants. There is still a lot of life in them, and by life I mean in all life forms, and we are trying to encompass all of that in our work and draw attention to all of that in our work with farmers and the general public. This is not just about conserving a few pretty flowers or one or two species of bird or mammal. This is about conserving a whole ecosystem in its entirety. So what are we and who are we? We are the Overberg Renosterveld Conservation Trust. This is a non-profit which I established in 2012. Our main focus, as I've mentioned, is to protect the last remnants of Renosterveld in the Overberg, and we do this by working and partnering with landowners in the wheat belt. So we run a number of different programs, but our flagship program is our conservation easement program. And this is a mechanism that we use. The conservation easement is a mechanism which we use to formally protect important Renosterveld remnants found on private land. So it effectively equates to a conservation servitude which is put over the land and attached to the title deed in perpetuity. This is of course only done obviously with willing landowners who see the benefits of conserving and want to leave something for future generations. It means that hectares are formally conserved and therefore also actively managed and restored in many cases. And through this process, through the partnerships that we build with the landowners, the management plans which we develop with them, the biodiversity surveys, the feedback, the enormous amount of engaging that we do with these farmers, we slowly work towards capacitating them to become felt managers and to manage their farms as entities and not just with not just a focus on the production lands, but on all the components of their farms. And in this way, these landowners also get to leave a legacy, which is a really special contribution to make towards the conservation estate. So to date, we have secured over 4,000 hectares of Renosterveld into conservation easements, comprising 20 easements at this moment in time. We are currently about to sign up or working towards signing up an additional 500 hectares. So we have We've secured a fair number of remnants. The green highlighted cadasters in this map, land parcels, show where these remnants, where these farms are, where we have these conservation easements. Some of them are connected through landowners, multiple landowners signing easements. Others are still on their own, and we are still working towards expanding and connecting the sites. But essentially we started with focusing on the largest, most intact areas of Renosterveld and working from there. So in return for signing easements, landowners also receive assistance with the implementation of the management priorities that we identify in the management plans which we draw up for them. So because of our funding support from WWF and others, we are able to provide actual resources, tangible resources towards alien clearing, fencing, felt, assisting with ecological burns, some watercourse restoration and erosion control interventions, and so on. And this is what makes it worthwhile for landowners, that they can conserve without it costing them a lot, or if anything at all. So as some of you may be aware, I worked with Rob on Black Harriers since 2000. We started the Harrier project in 2000, and I worked on them for 7 years, and they became part of my master's project. And we've kind of come full circle now, with always having kept an eye on the birds, but never quite appreciating how dire things had become for them, and what an important role the Overberg plays in providing breeding and foraging habitat for the species. So some background, first of all, on this is that in our early days of early Harrier work, we started with looking at how these birds and how are they using Renosterveld remnants. We knew they bred in the mountains, in the fynbos, we knew they bred in the Strandveld on the coast, but what they were doing in Renosterveld was a mystery. We had no idea. We thought maybe they even bred in wheat fields. That's how little we knew at that time. What we found was they definitely don't ever breed in transformed lands or wheat fields, but what they do is, in Renosterveld, they target the largest remaining fragments. So they don't breed in the smallest small pieces or little streams or watercourses between these fragments, between this sea of monoculture. They only breed in the largest remnants. And one can infer from that because they clearly want to be in Renosterveld and they are still using it, it is likely that due to the loss of Renosterveld, the 95% which we've lost, Harriers have lost a significant chunk of their preferred breeding habitat within their natural range. So in more recent years, we have started to look more closely at where Harriers are breeding in the wheat belts. And you will see from that map that the little blue stars there represent areas where Harriers have been recorded breeding in the past. It's quite a scattered distribution, of course, in line with where the scattered and the largest remnants are found. But also what's very interesting and really important is that the eastern ruins, so east of the Bredasdorp Swellendam tar road, seems to be a stronghold for the species, seems to be the most important area in Renosterveld for them. And we have found, we reckon, as many as 20 nests on just through those 3 sites that you see there under the red circle. So a really significant proportion of the overall population. We expect we'll find more as we survey more of these farms, and these numbers could go up substantially. But why they are selecting these sites is still a mystery. It must have to do with the extensiveness of them, the connectivity, and obviously prey availability in and around the remnants. However, we are extremely worried, not just about the fragmented state of Renosterveld and what this means for Harriers, but also the fact that the entire Overberg wheat belt has been identified as a renewable energy development zone, meaning that is considered a priority area for future wind farm developments. And wind farms pose an enormous threat to the Black Harriers. They are one of the highest collision risk species, and several have already been killed across the country on various wind farms. This is of grave concern to us. It means that despite the fact that these birds are now seeking refuge in these remnants, there is now the oncoming threat of wind farms dotted across this landscape, causing significant numbers of Harrier deaths if we are not proactive about mitigating for this. So one of the ways in which we are trying to be proactive about this is to understand how our birds are using the landscape for foraging in and around the Renosterveld remnants, particularly when they are close to existing wind farms. We already have 2 in the Overberg wheat belt, but several more applications are coming in, and the rate of approval for these developments is increasing rapidly. So we have so far managed to raise funds for 6 satellite tags to fit on Black Harriers around one of the wind farms and other important nearby sites to see how these birds are using the landscape. We tagged to date 6 males and receiving incredible data. These tags are just amazing. The kind of feedback that you get from them in terms of the altitudes that the birds are flying at, how they're using the landscape of foraging in terms of transformed versus agricultural land. Fantastic data that I had kind of dreamed about being able to access when I was doing my master's. So this map just gives you an idea for some of the tag birds. Many of them were breeding close together or on the same site. Just to see, you can see the kinds of data that we're getting. Obviously, you can zoom right in here and get detailed information on a day's flight or a week's flight or whatever you choose. And then also get an idea of sort of an almost 3D look at how the birds are using the landscape in terms of heights and altitudes, which are obviously very important for potential wind farm developments and existing ones. Okay, here are the data from a single male, which was satellite tagged in early summer of 2020. He was breeding opposite the wind farm, Excelsior wind farm, which you can see is the little red square within his foraging range. This wind farm, if the process happened today where they applied for approval, would never have been approved, would never be approved now because of the Harrier guidelines which are now in place. This is within 3 kilometers of several nests, and with those guidelines in place, this would never have gone through. However, it did go through many, many years before the Harrier guidelines were put in place, as well as the vulture guidelines, because the Hoop vultures are also nearby. And sadly, it did go ahead, and now we are working very closely with this wind farm to ensure that birds are not killed on the site by the turbines. This has worked really well to date. The wind farm is genuinely committed to making sure they totally avoid killing all raptors, particularly those of conservation concern. And they have a program in place with monitors and a shutdown on demand principle whereby monitors who are watching from 3 vantage points throughout the day are able to radio in a sighting of a harrier coming in, or a vulture or any other raptor. They're able to radio it in saying there's a harrier coming in, for example, towards turbine 11, shut down, and they immediately stop the blades turning and shut it down until the bird has moved through. This has proved very, very successful until recently. This male spent his time in and out of this wind farm, as I mentioned, foraging throughout the season, and was able to rear chicks and managed to get through it all safely. He then moved on to De Hoop and the coast for a couple of months, and then all of a sudden, after the floods of 2021, his signal stopped and we presumed that he was dead. The bird, however, was not dead in May, but ironically was killed by the turbines in November later that year. The monitoring team picked up his carcass. It was still warm when they brought him to me, and sadly, yeah, this was just observer error. The bird was missed, and this was the first raptor and first black harrier to be killed on the site. The tag was in fact faulty and has been replaced since by the manufacturers. Just when we thought it couldn't get worse, in that same week, a second bird was killed. In fact, looking back on the satellite data, we worked out that this bird was killed the night before our bird that was killed by the turbines. This was a really sad and kind of freak accident. I hope not something that is commonplace, but this bird was roosting in a wheat field across the road from his nest, and it's a common practice in the Overberg for farmers to cut and harvest at night due to the limited window they have to harvest and also the cooler conditions at night. So this bird must have been disorientated and confused by the lights and the noise, and didn't manage to escape this big machine that came towards him while he was sleeping on the ground. So he was very tragically, literally cut in half by the wheat cutter, and then a few days later tossed further aside by the harvester when it came to pick up the wheat. This is tragic and something we were not aware of in the past. We weren't aware that this happens to harriers, and of course we don't know how frequently this does happen, but these birds do make use of the wheat belt extensively for foraging, and no doubt spend much time roosting in it too. We subsequently fitted the tag retrieved from the bird killed by the wheat cutter and fitted it onto a female who's still feeding us data, along with the other 5 males that are still tagged and healthy. Sorry, that's 4 males. We are very concerned about the mortality rates that we've seen here, and I really and truly hope that 2 out of 6 birds is not representative of the population's mortality rates. If these birds are getting killed in the numbers that we have seen from this small sample, we have a lot to worry about, a lot more than we had expected, and more than any models predict. We urgently need to get more satellite tags on harriers in the red zone, in the renewable energy development zone of the Overberg. We need to understand how they're using these remnants, how they are using them at different times of the year, and how high they are flying and foraging and traveling with regards to potential new developments, of which there are many, many applications coming in. And of course, most importantly, we also need to make sure that their breeding areas are conserved, their roost sites are conserved, and that we do everything we can to predict where these birds might move to in future climate change scenarios, so that we can always make sure we are looking after their habitats. So there is a way that you could assist us with furthering our efforts towards understanding these birds better. As you know, we have already tagged 6 individuals, and we recently received additional funds for a 7th tag from the Netherlands Montague Harrier Foundation. We are now looking to raise at least funding for at least another 3 tags, so that we can get to a total of 10 Harriers tagged in the Overberg Renosterveld. We're currently running a fundraising campaign through BackaBuddy. You can find it on backabuddy.co.za and look for the Saving Black Harriers project. Any donations are hugely appreciated. This entire fundraising approach through crowdfunding relies on many, many different donations coming in to help us reach our goal. I would also like to encourage you to please visit our website, www.overbergrenosterveld.org.za, and you can learn more about our work through our website. You can also make donations to the Harrier project directly through us if you would choose to, if you prefer to do so. And yeah, we look forward to giving you feedback in the near future. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Odette, for that very interesting presentation. I'm just going to now play a very short video, 2-minute video from the Overberg Renosterveld Conservation Trust.
It's an enormous privilege to be working on a bird that is so charismatic and so beautiful to watch. I've been working on them on and off for 20 years, and my heart still skips a beat every time I see one. And it's extremely worrying that they are in such trouble.
Wow, that was a beautiful video. Thank you very much, Odette, for making that and sharing that with us. Odette and Rob, we have quite a few questions, so if you are ready to answer them, please turn on your videos. So firstly, thank you very much. That was, as one of the comments in the chat box, quite sobering, but also fascinating and inspiring, the work that you both are doing to try and conserve these birds. So thank you very much for that. So yeah, we'll get on to some questions, but before we we do that, I'll just remind everyone that we'll be back again next week, and you'll actually have me again on your screens, but this time as a presenter talking about my work on African penguins. So let's dive into some questions. There are a lot of questions around the wind farms. Let's start with Christine Rodriguez asking, saying, I noticed the wind farm turbine blades are always white, which could potentially blend into the sky. Would a bright color such as orange not help? Has research been done on this? Now, Rob, I think you are aware of the latest research. I know there's some talk about painting wind turbine blades black. Maybe you can answer this one for us.
Sure, it's a great question. Yes, there's some lovely work done in Norway with white-tailed eagles there, showing that if you paint one of the blades, not all of the blades, black, one of the blades about 2/3, then the eagles are much more likely to see it. And in fact, in 7 years during their research, they found that no more eagles were killed at the 4 turbines that had the single black blade. We have tried, sorry about the dark, I've got lots of lovely load shedding here. Let me put the lights up a little bit. We are strongly looking at this in South Africa, and the Civil Aviation Authority do not like black. They have very strict guidelines that they should all be white, bright white, because they think the pilots will see bright white. Now, actually, there's research to show not only do birds not see bright white as well as striped blades, but people, the students that were investigated, also didn't see the bright white as well as the striped blades. And when I say striped, that's 2 broad black or colored stripes across the blade, not along the blade, but across the blade. And Civil Aviation, there's one glimmer. They're very much against black, but there's a glimmer that they are interested in signal red. When you see a Vodacom tower, it's painted in red. That's called signal red. They will allow us to do some experiments with signal red. So it's quite exciting. We're almost at the cusp where we could start to do this sort of work in South Africa. Birds and Bats Unlimited personally are associated with 2 different developers who are interested in doing this. So it could happen very soon. And it's a great question.
Great. Yeah, that's very interesting. Hopefully something comes of it and we can make these blades a bit more visible to the birds. Now, both of you covered this next question slightly in your talks, but George Ledek is asking, do the wind farm operators follow any curtailment procedures, such as short-term shutdowns when Black Harriers or other threatened raptors are seen nearby, etc.? So maybe you can expand on some of the things that the wind farm operators need to do. I don't know who wants to.
I will let Odette answer that question, I think.
Oh, okay. Well, I can only speak for Excelsior because that's the wind farm that we have a relationship with. Rob has relationships with many of the others, but they are doing their absolute best to do exactly all those things that are recommended there. So the shutdown on demand policy that they have is incredible, and as I said, has been really effective. But one can't account for observer error or human error. Someone might get tired, or the light's shining in your eyes, you know, the sun's coming up and you miss a bird, or you look the other way and you miss a bird, and that must be obviously what happened with this one individual. So it's very effective, but we need to do more. And so that's why, as Rob said, we are really hoping the black blade painting can be implemented. So yeah, but we're in very close contact. We have a WhatsApp group with all the observers, the monitors that work at Excelsior, and they're in regular contact with us. Rob's constantly feeding them data on where our birds are foraging, and they're coming back to us with observations. So it's a great relationship that we've built with them. It's not necessarily the case for every other wind farm, and I think we need to make sure that any new ones that are approved now have to implement every possible mitigation measure.
Yeah, absolutely. So that kind of, I think you've answered most of Rosie Shields' question, but in general, do you find the industry supportive and willing to help, or is it a bit of a mixed bag?
Christina and the questioner, I would say that yes, the industry has been very supportive, and we have very good relations with yourselves, BirdLife South Africa, through Sam Ralston-Payton, who herself is very proactive with the wind farm developers. But as a specialist, we have constant discussions with. We're not just providing reports. We are having sit-down discussions with these guys and saying, look, you can't put wind turbines there. You must put them here, please. And the please sometimes gets, a little bit stronger than a please. And secondary, if you're going to put turbines there in a medium risk area, then we would say you've got to have 2 tiers of mitigations. You've got to have striped blades with civil aviation willing, and secondly, you've got to have an automated or an observer-led shutdown on demand, as Odette was just talking about. So there's actually 2 tiers. We have said to some developers, and I get this question all the time, that your wind farm is just in a too dangerous a place for birds. It might be in a red zone. Red zones were not chosen for birds. They were chosen for the energy industry. And Sam Ralston will tell you this as well. She's very cross. BirdLife are quite cross about the red zones because sometimes they're in, like the Overberg, they're in a very threatened and critically endangered habitat itself, with lots of Cape vultures, Verreaux's eagles, blue cranes, and black harriers flying around. So sometimes we do say to developers, your wind farm is simply too dangerous. You have to move on elsewhere, and we will suggest where to move on, and we'll even say try solar as well, which is very much has very many fewer fatalities.
Great, yeah. Good to know that you can work with them. So Jesselina Suri asks about the guidelines that you put together recently, Rob, and are they? She's asking how binding are the guidelines? Are they guidelines, or do they carry a bit more weight than that?
Whenever we write our reports, Jesselina, we always refer to the guidelines, and because it's not Rob Simmons and Sophie Garcia Harris and Robin Collane and Sam Ralston, it's BirdLife who are suggesting, and they know that BirdLife have a lot of clout with the Department of Energy. So it's not a recommendation. It is, you will follow these guidelines, and we say it in the nicest possible way, but we're quite hard about it. So for all you doubters out there, we do have some very strong conversations, and it's beautifully backed up by BirdLife. So thank you to you guys, and especially to Sam for being the big stick sometimes.
Yeah, Sam has done some amazing work and continues to do amazing work in this renewable energy space. Changing tack a little bit, maybe this one's for you, Odette. Penny Abbott asks what the Black Harriers are feeding on that is so restricted to Renosterveld.
They're not restricted to Renosterveld. They are breeding in a variety of fynbos habitats. It's just that our work focuses on Renosterveld. They're also breeding in the Strandveld on the west coast, the Strandveld in the Overberg as well, montane areas too, but mostly wherever they are, they're feeding on striped mice, rhabdomus, and often common quail as well. And in both cases, they are hunting these often outside of the natural areas in the wheat fields around them. So they're not restricted necessarily by what they're eating, but our concern is that they would have bred throughout the fynbos biome, and we have lost a significant chunk of that biome, particularly through the loss of Renosterveld, which is why we're focusing on Renosterveld. And of course, they have shown that they actually want to be in Renosterveld. They're using the remnants that are still available. So I hope that clarifies that question.
Yeah, thanks. I hope we haven't lost Rob. I see you've turned off your video. Maybe that's to conserve battery. Good, you are still there. Good. Maybe you can answer this one. Amanda Hayes says, I thought I saw a Black Harrier in northern Botswana near Shakawe. I don't know if I'm saying that right, in 2014. Is that possible? Now, I know very little about the Black Harrier distribution, Rob, but can you enlighten us?
Listen, there have been, Amanda, there have been some sightings of Black Harriers in southwestern Botswana. I don't know of any sightings in northern Botswana. Your bird is probably either going to be a Gabar goshawk, which is very, very similar, just a little bit smaller. I've had 2 photographs actually sent to me from Windhoek in Namibia of an apparent Black Harrier drowned in a swimming pool, and a closer look, especially at the leg color and the cere color, shows it's actually a melanistic Gabar goshawk. So take another look at any photographs that you have, and it's likely to be a Gabar goshawk. You occasionally get melanistic Montagu's Harriers and melanistic pallid Harriers coming down, but they are extremely rare. So it's more likely to be a Gabar goshawk.
Okay, great, thank you. Now, earlier in your talk, you mentioned Rob, DDT as a poison, and Bonita Reed was asking whether that was not outlawed, and how is it still kind of in the conversation at the moment?
You have some very sharp readers out there. I'm loving it. Sophie, who did that work in her thesis, said exactly the same. DDT is still allowed in the malaria areas, so in the far northeastern of South Africa, but it's not allowed. It is illegal to use it in the Western Cape. But indeed, very sharp of you to notice that the birds were apparently shouldn't be suffering from this. Now, Sophie did some very clever things in that she assessed the DDT and the DDE and the DDD. Now, those other derivatives will tell you if it's old DDT or whether it's yesterday's DDT, because as you know, DDT persists a lot in especially wetland habitats. And there was a lot of DDT, which means it's fresh, which means it's recently used. Could that have come from the quail? We know from Sophie's work, especially, that they pick up the DDT, especially from eating birds. So the more birds in the diet, the higher the DDT levels. Could those birds migrate in from northeast South Africa? It's possible. It's just possible, but I think it's more possible that farmers are actually using it illegally in the Western Cape, unfortunately, and it does persist in the wetlands.
Okay, that's quite worrying if that is the case. I guess very hard to disentangle that. Now, Odette, maybe you can answer this one. Ingrid Worsby is asking about whether ex situ raising, taking 1 or 2 eggs, whether that would be an option, particularly where breeding sites are near wind turbines.
Sure, that's a bit of a controversial
Yes.
question. Not really something we'd support. Raptors especially are always best raised by their parents. They do best, and you know, people can't replace that. Humans can't replace the teaching them how to hunt and the slow way that they are you know, fledge and learn to become independent in the wild. But as I think most importantly there is, as Rob pointed out, is that the biggest threat is not the youngsters dying, it's the adults dying. That is the biggest impact on the population. Of course, if adults die while they're raising chicks, then the chicks die too. So that's obviously a big concern. If we saw that if the adult is lost quite late into the breeding time, so when the chicks are big or fledging, that one can still continue and raise them on her own potentially. That has happened, but obviously if it's at a very sort of more fragile stage, when they have small chicks and there's several of them and a male dies, it's guaranteed that his chicks will die too. So yeah, it's a difficult one. I hope we're not at that point yet. I think our efforts and our money would be better spent on conserving habitats and understanding the birds better so that we know where to target our conservation efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. when species are being threatened by habitat loss, raising more of them to put them back into the same habitat is not going to be a long-term solution.
Exactly.
So your conservation easements project is great for that, to try and conserve the habitats that they need.
Yeah, and I mean, and sorry, I just want to add to that, Christina, that it's obviously we can't do all the work in a small part of their range in the Overberg, but efforts are being made now through a Black Harrier task team that we've developed with BirdLife and EWT and other important partners in this process, that we hope to be able to target other important areas for conservation beyond the Overberg. So that's really important. Their roost sites and their migration routes and all that have to be considered as well.
Yeah, that would be great. Now, George Ledek is asking about the bird that you found killed in the wheat field, and whether wheat farmers could be required or incentivized to harvest by day to avoid killing roosting black harriers and other vulnerable fauna. Do you think that this is a big enough problem to need to do that, and would the farmers be amenable to it?
I think that the most important thing there is that we understand the extent of the problem before we look at things like that, because asking farmers not to harvest at night, I don't think it would ever work. They have this tiny, very limited window in which they can harvest. And I think it would be a big ask to expect them not to do that anymore. Mm-hmm. It's very unusual that a bird roosts, first of all, as far as I know, so far away from his breeding site. He was across the N2 in a wheat field. It was very odd. And hopefully this isn't something that happens regularly. In Europe and other places where the Montagu's Harriers and that, for example, are breeding in wheat fields, they do demarcate those areas and plow and harvest around them. But luckily our birds aren't breeding in the wheat field. So I'm still hoping this was just a freak thing and it doesn't happen on a regular basis. But,
let's hope so.
Yeah.
Penny Abbott is asking another question about the trackers. If you had trackers on all the birds, could you do without observers at wind farms, or could you kind of check the track? Rob, maybe you want to answer this one. I know it would be amazing if you could track every single bird, however unlikely.
Yeah, Penny, the question has been asked before because it does get us, as you've seen, such an enormous amount of data. Those data points that I was showing and Odette was showing are basically logged every 15 minutes, and you can geofence it such the bird, once it goes into the wind farm, actually you get a log every minute if you wish. So we have high resolution data. It would take a lot to put trackers on all of the birds. You've got to remember, these females are sitting on eggs, sitting on chicks brooding. We can't interfere with their lives too much. We target the males because we know they go furthest. And I don't think you can ever take away from an observer watching a bird go through a wind farm, for example, like the carcass searchers, watched that particular male. He made no deviation as the turbine blade hit him. I questioned them very closely on it because it's one of the few observations we have of a black harrier being killed. Marley and I, when we first went to Jeffreys Bay Wind Farm on our second day out, we watched a subadult marshal eagle being killed. It made no deviation as the blade came towards it, and a tracker wouldn't tell you that the subadult was killed by the turbine blade. So you do need observers out there, and of course the observer-led programs are also shutting down those turbines. So that's a very important mitigation, which is proving to be very successful in both Kenya, in Kipeto, and at Excelsior, and will probably be rolled out at other wind farms in South Africa.
Great. Yeah.
Can I add to that? Christina? So I also want to just say that the observers are there not just for black harriers, but for vultures and all the other species that we're concerned about. So that's the one thing. And also, you know,
have we lost Odette?
quite a thing to get them on a good.
I think we might be losing you, Odette. I know you said you were going to have load shedding.
Sorry, I dipped out there. I'm back.
There you are. Okay, thanks.
Are you there?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Okay, sorry. So I think, and also I think that just to understand the difference between the point of the trackers is so that we learn about where these birds are going in areas also where there aren't yet turbines, but that we can then predict where the most vulnerable areas will be when there are, because there are so many development applications coming in now. So we need to be proactive about understanding what these birds are doing in the landscapes, that we can say immediately, this isn't going to work in this area because we know harriers are foraging through here on a regular basis. So yeah, I think that's important to keep in mind for the tags. They don't last forever, and we can't fit them on so many birds. Yeah,
absolutely. We just have 2 more questions left. First one for Rob, probably. Ted van der Meulen asks, what about streamers on the end of the blades of the turbines? I would imagine that might cause some operational problems.
Each blade comes with a warranty of approximately, I think it's about 5 years. Most wind farms have a lifetime of about 20 years. You cannot attach anything. You cannot even paint a turbine with anything, put anything on it without losing that warranty. And of course, you know, if a turbine blade, which is going to cost possibly millions of rands, is going to disintegrate, then you need that warranty to replace it. So it may work. I think painting the blades is a much better option. It's shown to work. We've just got to get civil aviation to come to the party.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Hopefully they do come to the party very soon. And one last question from Wilfred Reynolds for Odette, to give you a chance to punch your crowdfunding campaign again. What does one satellite tracker cost?
Okay, so one tracker costs 25,000 Rand. I just wanted to also let you know that we are extremely close to reaching our target. We set a target of a minimum of 3 trackers, so that would be 75,000 Rand. When I last checked just before this talk, we were only 4,000 Rand short of reaching our target, which is fantastic. And we've that is largely, many donations have contributed to that. Several donations have added up, and then we had a Callan Cohen from Birding Africa sponsor an entire tracker. So they're going to get to name their bird. And we just got word today from the Cape Bird Club that they will also be sponsoring a tracker over and above this crowdfunder, that what you see on the targets there. So so we're almost at actually 4 trackers when we'd aimed for 3. So we're very chuffed with this. So yeah, thank you all for this support, and whatever additional money we raise for additional trackers, we would also like to use in other parts of the country, like the Jeffreys Bay area, where the birds are really being heavily impacted, and you know, new developments on the horizon all the time. So we really need to understand this beyond the Overberg Black Harriers. So yeah, we will keep going with this fundraiser and extend it to Harriers throughout the country.
That's amazing news. So congratulations, and thanks to all the donors who are supporting that. I've just put the link again in the chat box, so if you missed it earlier, you can go and check it out. And I hope that tonight's talk will push you over your targets, Odette, and even give you a little bit more to do even more. So I think we'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Rob and Odette, for taking the time and all your hard work on conserving these amazing birds. I don't know if there's one last thing that either of you would like to say before we end off.
I think I'd like to say that it's been an absolute pleasure to work with Odette Curtis. As you've seen, she's a dynamic lady. She's kept me on my toes for the last 22 years. I'm a bit grayer as a result of spending many hours in the car with her. We've had an amazing friendship, and it's just going from strength to strength now. And I would like to thank BirdLife South Africa for their continued support and really coming to the party now themselves, especially now the lights are on in Komaki. It feels really good. Coming to the party and supporting us in our quest to save this bird from extinction.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rob, and ditto. It's been a wonderful 22 years, and it's amazing to come full circle and be working on the birds again. In next to everything else that we're doing on Renosterveld. So it's been a privilege, and we're really excited about the relationship we're building with BirdLife and strengthening it and the partnership. I think it's really exciting and fantastic, and thank you all for your support on making this happen. It's really wonderful. Thank you.
Great, thank you both, and I know BirdLife equally values the relationship that we are building with both of you and your organizations. So thank you very much. So all that's left for me to do is say thank you very much to our audience for sticking with us, and glad that you were able to join us despite the load shedding. So take care, everyone. Keep safe, keep warm, and we'll see you next week. Good night.